ethical speculation has been around for 3,000 years, 2,500 years. What is ethics? Plato, Aristotle, the Torah, the prophets, they've all dealt with, well, how do you live an ethical life? How do you live a good life? Because isn't a good life living an ethical life? Isn't that part and parcel of the fabric of living goodly and godly? So I wish I had an interesting answer, and for me, I'll tell you what it is. For me, I'll tell you what it is. It is to go back. I live in a certain tradition. I'm a rabbi. I look to the Torah. I read the Torah. I read when it says, don't oppress, dignify people. People should live with dignity. And I look to the Talmud. There's this great Talmud, a great piece of Talmud, Hasocher Sapolim, one who hires workers. There's a whole tractate. I mean, we're not the first, 20th century America isn't the first time we thought about how do we treat our workers. Gemara talks about it. The Gemara says that when you hire someone, you have to do minhag hamakom. You have to do the way people work in the land. What the standards are. There are standards. There are always standards. And one of the standards are, well, if they are paid if people are usually paid to commute, you pay them to commute. And if the minhag hamakom, if the condition, the custom of the land is to give them a certain amount of food, you give them that food. And then the one time one rabbi doesn't stipulate food, he hires workers, or his son hires workers, he doesn't stipulate food. He said, you had to stipulate what food, because if he didn't, then you have to give them a feast of Solomon. Right? And the 20th century philosopher, Emmanuel Levinas, he's a really great thinker, an Orthodox person, really one of the great 20th century, not only Jewish philosophers, but philosophers. He has Talmudic commentaries, and he comments on that piece of Gemara, and he says, Judaism is humanism concerned with dessert. Humanism concerned with dessert. Sublime humanism, sublime materialism. And for me, that's a guidepost. That's a guidepost of what it means to live an ethical life, of how to treat people ethically. So I think that when I think about it, if I want to think about actual guidelines, because these are more, values and how to think, well, I think that the first place to look is American law. First place to look is in American law. We have to make sure that people in our restaurants are being paid minimum wage. Not only that, we have to make sure that people in our restaurants not only are being paid minimum wage, but their overtime is tracked. Because I think probably in different reports we've read said, and talking to people in the field, 20% maybe don't make minimum wage. Right? Most people make minimum wage, thank God. But most people, overtime isn't tracked. 60-70% of workers, restaurant workers, minimum overtime isn't tracked. And that's where people make time and a half. That's where people are able to really supplement their income. And I think that's a law. That's minhag hamakom. Not only minhag hamakom, that's not only the law of the land, that's dina de machuta dina. That's also what the law of the land. And we really have to follow that. So I think that's a baseline. That's definitely a baseline. And also a baseline is to make sure people aren't abused, people are treated with dignity. And that's, I think, the next project that we as an organization are looking towards. We're looking towards making sure, and we're starting grassroots, local, New York area, making sure that these people in restaurants, are afforded the dignity that they deserve, that law is being followed, ethics are being followed. We think probably restaurants could go more. I think that, I'm talking about a baseline here, but I think that when I, as a consumer, as a kosher consumer, go into a restaurant, I want to make sure that baselines are being kept. And then that's where the conversation, I think, begins. But baselines have to be kept.